The film is set in a large mansion located in the remote countryside of Jersey in 1945. Living in the house is a woman named Grace, together with her two young children, Anne and Nicholas. Both children suffer from a rare condition that prevents them from being exposed to sunlight. Because of this, Grace always keeps the entire house covered with heavy curtains so that no light can enter. If exposed to sunlight, their skin would blister. Grace's husband, Charles, does not live with them, as he is serving on the front lines as a soldier. The mansion had been purchased by Charles in the hope that his wife and children could live more safely, far from the chaos of the war that was devastating Europe at the time, especially between France and Germany. It has been almost a year and a half since Charles left, and there has been no word from him. One day, 3 strangers named Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia arrive at the mansion. They come seeking employment, as the economic situation is very difficult due to the war. Seeing how large the house is, they realize Grace could not possibly manage it on her own, and they hope she would agree to hire them. Grace welcomes their arrival warmly. In fact, she has been expecting new workers, as she had previously placed a job advertisement in the newspaper. Before making a decision, Grace asks about their work experience. The 3 reply that they are quite experienced. Edmund usually works as a gardener. Bertha is used to managing household affairs, while Lydia, who is mute, usually helps with general chores around the house. Grace then takes them on a tour of the mansion.
Hard-working than us. Isn't that right, Mr. Tuttle?
Lunch will be served at 1 and dinner at 7:30.
However, before she could explain much further, Bertha reveals that the 3 of them had actually worked in that very house before, back when it was owned by the previous family. They even still remember the layout of the rooms, as long as no major changes had been made. Grace is slightly surprised but responds that since her husband purchased the house, only a few changes have been made. Seeing their experience, Grace finally decides to hire Edmund as the gardener, Bertha as the housekeeper, and Lydia as the maid. The reason Grace was in search of new servants was because the previous ones had suddenly disappeared without a trace and never returned. After that, Grace took them to meet her children. Along the way, she explained the important rules that had to be followed in the house. All curtains must always remain tightly closed. None should ever be left open because sunlight could endanger Anne and Nicholas's health. Every time a door was opened, it had to be shut and locked again. No room was ever to be left unlocked. All the keys would be entrusted to Bertha. Besides the rules about doors and curtains, there was something else just as important. Grace could not tolerate noise. She wanted the house to always remain quiet. That was why there was no radio or telephone in the house. Even though there was a piano, Grace forbade her children from playing it because it could cause noise. The mansion also did not always have a steady supply of electricity, so they had to be accustomed to living in darkness. For lighting, Grace mostly used candles because candlelight was harmless to her children. On the way, Grace divided the tasks. She asked Edmund to take care of the garden, which had long been neglected, while Bertha and Lydia accompanied her to meet the children. Before entering the bedroom, Grace reminded them to close all the curtains that were still open. Once the curtains were tightly shut, Grace slowly woke her 2 children.
Wakey, wakey. They're still half asleep.
At that moment, Bertha and Lydia overheard Anne and Nicholas praying, and from this, they realized that Grace's family was deeply religious. After the brief meeting with the children, Grace instructed Lydia to make sure all the curtains in the kitchen remained shut because it was time for the children to have breakfast.
I don't like this toast.
Just finish up your breakfasts.
While Bertha stayed with the children during breakfast, Grace called her over again.
Mrs. Mills, would you come outside a moment?
There was something Grace wanted to talk about. She found it strange that the 3 of them had arrived because just recently she had checked the mailbox and discovered that the letter containing her job advertisement was still there. Usually the postman would collect it every Wednesday, but up until that moment, it had not been taken. This made Grace wonder how Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia knew she was looking for new servants, when in fact the advertisement had never been published in the newspaper. Calmly, Bertha explained that it was obvious a house that big could not possibly be managed by Grace alone. Since the economic situation was so difficult due to the war, she, Edmund, and Lydia had taken the chance to come, hoping to find work. According to Bertha, perhaps it was nothing more than coincidence.
It's rather difficult, to say the least.
After the children finished breakfast, Grace began teaching them religious values. That day, she emphasized the importance of honesty, stressing that lying was a sin that must never be committed. Instead of studying seriously, Anne and Nicholas joked around with each other, which made Grace angry.
What do you find so amusing? Is that what you think too, Nicholas?
As punishment, she forbade them from playing and separated them into different rooms to study so they would no longer disturb each other. At first, Anne and Nicholas resisted because they felt afraid. They admitted that they often heard and saw ghostly apparitions in the house. Grace firmly reassured them that ghosts did not exist and insisted that they must still study in separate rooms.
Separate rooms. No. Take your book.
Fight with our brothers and sisters.
After making sure the children were back to focusing on their lessons, Grace went to speak with Bertha. During the conversation, Grace asked about Lydia, as she was curious whether Lydia had been mute since birth. Bertha's answer shocked her because it turned out that Lydia had once been able to speak but had become mute in recent years. Bertha did not explain the cause in detail, then left Grace to go help Edmund in the garden. After Bertha's departure, Grace suddenly heard the sound of a boy crying. Thinking it was Nicholas, she went to check on him. However, Nicholas was busy reading a book and was not crying at all. Grace then went to Anne, worried the sound might have come from her. Just like Nicholas, Anne also appeared calm and focused on her studies. Confused and slightly uneasy, Grace asked Anne if she had heard the crying voice. Anne replied that the sound came from a ghost boy named Victor, who lived with them in the house. Victor often appeared in the house and had even said that Anne's family must leave. Not only Victor, Anne also mentioned that Victor's parents and an old blind woman lived there as well, although none of them spoke except for Victor. Of course, Grace dismissed it all as childish imagination. She did not believe a single word Anne said and told her to continue studying. Just as Grace was about to leave the room, she was startled to see a door standing open. According to the strict rules she had set in the house, that door should have been shut and locked. Seeing her mother's reaction, Anne immediately said that Victor had just gone through the door. But Grace refused to believe her. To her, this was not the doing of any ghost, but the carelessness of Bertha, whom she accused of failing to lock the door properly.
What, by opening and closing the doors? I thought I made myself quite clear.
But, Mum,
Do not argue with me, be quiet!
That night, Nicholas, who was asleep, was suddenly awakened by Anne. She told her brother to look toward their bedroom window. Nicholas was shocked to find that the curtain, which was supposed to remain closed at all times, was now wide open. Anne then whispered that she was not the one who opened it. It was Victor. Victor often did this every night, sneaking in and opening the curtains while they slept. Hearing Anne's explanation made Nicholas anxious. He felt that this had gone too far and wanted to call their mother. Wanting to prove that she was not lying, Anne asked Victor to show himself and touch Nicholas. In an instant, Nicholas felt something invisible touch his cheek, which made him scream hysterically. Nicholas's scream reached Grace's room and she rushed to the children's bedroom. Nicholas complained to his mother that Anne was trying to scare him, but Anne firmly denied it, insisting that the one who touched Nicholas's cheek was Victor, not her. Grace, already fed up with the ghost stories, refused to accept this explanation. She became furious at Anne for disturbing her brother's sleep and frightening him. Grace demanded that Anne admit her fault and apologize, but Anne stubbornly insisted that she was innocent. She would not apologize for something she did not do. Since Anne refused to confess, Grace decided to extend her punishment by making her read the Bible until morning.
He took the fire in his hand.
how long is this punishment going to go on?
Together, I will stay.
The next day, while Grace was relaxing downstairs, she suddenly heard footsteps coming from upstairs. It sounded like someone was running around. At first, she thought the sound came from Lydia, but when she looked outside, Lydia was with Bertha in the yard. If both of them were outside, then who was running upstairs? Curious, Grace went upstairs and found Anne still serving her punishment, reading the Bible. Grace asked if Anne had heard the footsteps. Afraid her punishment would be extended if she admitted it, Anne lied and said she hadn't heard anything. However, her uneasy expression betrayed her. Grace pressed her to tell the truth, and slowly, Anne confessed that the sound came from Victor. She even pointed to the attic as the place where Victor was hiding. Even though Anne had repeatedly spoken about Victor's presence and warned about other figures living with them, Grace still refused to believe. To her, none of it was real. She rejected all ghost stories and was convinced that if there were strange sounds or events, they had to be caused by human beings. Believing there was an intruder in the house, Grace asked Lydia and Edmund to search every corner of the mansion. The curtains, which had always been kept tightly closed to protect the children from sunlight, were now ordered to be opened. She wanted the entire house lit up to make it easier to find the intruder. To keep Anne and Nicholas safe from exposure to sunlight, Grace moved them into a closed room and instructed Bertha to watch over them during the search. Before the search began, Anne showed a drawing she had made herself. In the picture, there were 4 figures: Victor, his parents, and an old blind woman. On the drawing, Anne had written numbers to indicate how many times she had seen each of them. The figure she saw most often was the old blind woman, a total of 14 times, while Victor had only appeared 5 times but was the only one who could talk to her. Even after being shown the picture, Grace still did not believe. To her, it was all the result of children's imaginations fueled by too many scary stories. She remained convinced that a real intruder had entered the house and demanded that every corner be searched thoroughly. After a long search, they found no one. There were no signs of an intruder. Instead, Grace discovered several old photo albums. When she opened them, she noticed a series of photographs of people who looked as if they were sleeping with their eyes closed.
They're even group portraits.
Soon after, Bertha came and explained that those people were not sleeping, they were dead. In the past, the local tradition was to photograph the recently deceased with the belief that their souls would live on through the pictures. Hearing this explanation disturbed Grace deeply, and she ordered Bertha to remove all the photographs from the house.
"'Tis a book of the dead."
Oh, it's macabre. I don't want it in the house.
After things calmed down a little, Grace tried to distract herself by talking with Bertha. She asked about Bertha's past when she had worked in the mansion for the previous owners. Bertha then told her that she had once been trusted as the head housekeeper of the mansion. At that time, the house was filled with many workers, around 15 people, because its size required a large staff to maintain it. However, when their master went to London and never returned, everything began to change. One by one, the servants left the house because they no longer received wages. Only Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia stayed, cleaning the mansion even without pay. In 1891, a tuberculosis outbreak struck the area, and the situation became too dangerous, forcing the 3 of them to leave in search of a safer place. Many years later, their longing for the mansion brought them back again. Fortunately for them, Grace accepted Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia to return and work in the house.
"Oh, you know, my memory's a bit rusty. I think I will go to bed."
After Bertha returned to her room, Grace suddenly heard the sound of a piano playing from the music room. Feeling suspicious, she immediately went there. When she arrived at the door, Grace was shocked to find it unlocked, even though the house rules demanded that all rooms be kept tightly closed. With a sense of unease, she entered, carrying a weapon she had prepared beforehand in case there really was an intruder. But when she opened the door, the room was empty. No one was inside. Grace was baffled. It made no sense to her how the piano could have played by itself. To prevent it from happening again, she closed the piano lid and locked it tightly. Just as she was about to leave the room, the door suddenly slammed hard against her face. Startled and hurt, Grace tried to get back inside, but this time the door was locked from within. Since she did not have the key, Grace called Bertha to fetch a spare one. When the door was finally opened, she was shocked once again. The piano lid, which she had locked earlier, was now open. And just like before, the room was empty, not a single person in sight. From that moment on, Grace's conviction began to waver. All this time, she had refused to believe Anne's stories about ghosts, but the experience she had just gone through made her realize the house was truly haunted. Overcome with fear, Grace decided to seek help from a priest who could perform an exorcism.
Come today.
But what are you going to tell him?
Even though the morning road was shrouded in thick fog, Grace recklessly set out, paying no attention to her surroundings. On her way, she encountered Edmund. She told him that when the house had been purchased, the real estate agent had mentioned a family buried somewhere on the property. Grace asked Edmund to search for any gravestones that might still exist, especially ones bearing the names of Victor and his family. After that, Grace continued her journey alone. The further she walked, the denser the fog became, making it hard for her to find her way. In the midst of her confusion, she was suddenly startled by the figure of a man emerging from the fog.
But where have you been all this time?
To her astonishment, it was Charles, her husband. Many had said that Charles had died on the battlefield, yet here he was, standing before her, alive and real. Shock mixed with joy made Grace forget her original intention. Instead, she brought Charles home so he could be reunited with their children. Charles's arrival was welcomed joyfully by Anne and Nicholas. They were happy because at last their family was together again. When Grace invited him to eat with them, Charles preferred to rest in his room. Grace assumed that her husband was either unwell or still haunted by the trauma of war, which explained why he remained quiet and withdrawn.
Daddy is not well.
We'll never go anywhere.
The next day, Grace dressed Anne in a new gown she had sewn herself, reminding her daughter to take good care of it and not let it get dirty. Before going to check on Charles, who had refused to eat since the day before, Grace locked Anne's room to make sure her daughter stayed safe. When she went to be with Charles, Grace could only try to comfort him, though he said very little. Upon returning to Anne's room, Grace was horrified to see a figure that looked like Anne, but with wrinkled, aged hands. When she came closer, she realized it was not Anne at all, but the old blind woman mimicking her daughter's voice. Panicking and convinced it was not her daughter, Grace began to strangle the figure. But when it cried out, she suddenly realized that she was, in fact, choking Anne. Terrified, Anne burst into tears, shaken by what her mother had done to her. Hearing the crying, Bertha rushed in to comfort Anne and took her back to her room. After the incident, Grace began telling them about the old blind woman who disguised herself as her daughter. She was utterly certain about what she had seen. Seeing Grace so distressed, Bertha tried to offer her a sedative, but Grace refused and chose instead to calm herself down.
The ones you always take.
What are these?
Shortly afterward, Grace went to Charles in his room. There, Charles told her that he had to return to the battlefield. Grace tried to convince him that the war was over, but Charles insisted that his duty was not yet finished. This argument left Grace angry and heartbroken, especially since she had only just begun to feel happy again at having her husband back. In an attempt to stop him from leaving, they made love.
You're not going, do you hear me? You left us once. What did you expect?
However, the next morning, Charles slipped away without saying goodbye, leaving Grace in sorrow. She went outside to look for her husband, but her steps came to a halt when she heard Anne and Nicholas screaming from inside the house. Grace rushed back in and found that all the curtains had disappeared, leaving the children exposed to sunlight. Panicking, she tried to cover them and find a safe place, but the curtains were gone from every room. Desperate, Grace blocked the windows with chalkboards and whatever she could find to protect the children. She then accused the servants of hiding the curtains. However, Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia firmly denied it, even suggesting that Anne and Nicholas might actually have been cured of their illness. But Grace had simply never realized it. Their words infuriated Grace even more.
Oh dear.
The curtains! Someone wants to kill my children.
Believing they wanted to harm her children, she grabbed a weapon and threatened to kill them unless they returned the house keys. Bertha eventually handed over the keys, and Grace expelled the three of them from the house.
Give me the keys. I want your keys now.
After they left, Grace searched every corner of the mansion for the missing curtains. By nightfall, she still found none. There remained only one place she had not checked: the attic. When she entered, instead of finding the curtains, Grace discovered an old photograph dated December 1891. To her shock, it showed Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia dead from tuberculosis. At that moment, Grace realized the truth. The three servants who had been with her all this time were not human, but ghosts. Meanwhile, Anne and Nicholas, feeling distressed, tried to run away in search of their father.
Nighttime. I want to come come and look for Daddy too.
But on their way out, they stumbled upon 3 gravestones marked with the names of Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia.
Graves don't have ghosts, only skeletons. Nothing written here. Let's go.
When they saw the 3 appear before them as spirits, Anne and Nicholas panicked, ran back into the house, and screamed for their mother.
Get away from them! You're quick!
Hearing their cries, Grace quickly ordered them to hide and rushed to lock the house to keep the spirits out. Before she could follow Anne and Nicholas into their hiding place, Bertha appeared and told her they meant no harm. She insisted that Grace's family needed to learn to accept that the world of the dead would always exist alongside the world of the living. Grace refused, demanding that they leave her family alone. According to Bertha, the missing curtains were not their doing, but the work of the intruders Grace had suspected all along. Those intruders were now inside the house with Grace and the children, and sooner or later they would find them. Before Grace could fully process Bertha's words, she suddenly heard Anne and Nicholas screaming again.
Listen, wait here and I'll be back. There's someone there.
The old blind woman had found them hiding inside a wardrobe. Bertha urged Grace to communicate directly with the intruders. Grace immediately rushed to her children's location, but when she found them, she was stunned. Anne and Nicholas were not alone. In the room were the old blind woman, Victor's parents, and 2 others. It was then revealed that the old woman was a medium, and together with the others, she was conducting a seance. During the seance, the medium tried to speak with Anne's spirit. Question after question slowly revealed the bitter truth, that Anne and Nicholas were already dead, along with the cause of their deaths. Crushed by grief after hearing that Charles had been killed in the war, Grace lost control of herself and, in despair, unknowingly ended her children's lives by smothering them with pillows. After killing both of them, she turned the shotgun on herself. Hearing this revelation, Grace was shaken to the core, finally realizing that she and her children had long been dead. All this time, the people she believed to be intruders were actually Victor's family, still alive. The strange occurrences she had thought to be supernatural, doors opening, unfamiliar voices, were nothing more than the normal activities of the new occupants of the house. In truth, it was Victor's family who had experienced the haunting, especially when Grace, in denial, lashed out by overturning furniture and tearing papers. To the living, those moments appeared as terrifying paranormal phenomena. Even the heavy fog that constantly enveloped the mansion was not a natural weather condition, but a symbol that Grace and her children no longer belonged to the world of the living. It was also revealed that Lydia had fallen silent because of the deep shock she suffered after realizing she had died of tuberculosis alongside Bertha and Edmund. The trauma was so overwhelming that she could no longer speak. Unable to endure the disturbances any longer, Victor's family finally chose to leave the house. Meanwhile, Grace came to accept the painful truth that she, Anne, and Nicholas were dead. Filled with regret, she embraced her children and apologized for leading them to their deaths. Yet instead of letting go, she chose to see their state as a second chance granted by God. She convinced herself that even as spirits, they could remain together. Anne and Nicholas realized they were no longer sick and for the first time could feel the warmth of sunlight without fear. Grace then firmly declared that the mansion would belong to them forever, and no matter who came afterward, they would never leave. And so, the story ends.